to Odd Cylinders Garage. Now, hopefully by now you've already seen my video series on manually swapping an Audi D2 S8. If you haven't, please check the link down below. Now, probably the number one question I get about this swap is, how much does it cost? That's what we're going to go over today. So I'm going to break it down into different sections of different types of parts that you need for either the transmission, the engine, the drivetrain, etc. I'll then tell you a list of all the parts you need. I'm going to break it down and give you kind of three different tiers. Kind of a cheap, lowest possible price you could pay, kind of a middle ground, and then top tier OEM parts, the most money that you can spend. Now keep in mind, even though I kind of break it up into these three different tiers, you can mix and match. So if you want the cheapest option for one of the parts, that doesn't mean you have to cheap out on everything. You can kind of pick and choose, and that gives you a good balance of budget. So I'm going to tell you the minimum budget, bottom floor that you can spend, and then the sky is the limit for how much you really want to spend. So let's break it down. So I've compiled this all into a spreadsheet. It's on Google Sheets, link down below. Access that at any time. It's not going to tell you part numbers. It'll just kind of tell you the different things. And then if you need specific part numbers or sources for them, I've got most of that documented, at least for the options that I've chosen, in my project thread, which is also linked down below. So let's start it out. So in the transmission section, of course, you need the transmission. You need the transmission mounts, the clutch and flywheel setup, all of that. The pedal, both the clutch and the brake pedal setup, things that go along with that. And then also the shifter and the reverse light harness. So let's start out with the transmission. So most people are going to use an O&E Audi transmission. This is widely regarded as pretty much the strongest factory manual transmission from Audi. It doesn't shift great, kind of shifts like a truck, some people say. You could explore doing the later manual transmissions, the so-called O&X. There's like the OA3, stuff like that. They are all aluminum cases, whereas the O&E had a steel center section. People have had pretty good luck out of it, and especially with just a stock S8 engine, it's not going to push the limits of that transmission at all. This is what came in like the B6, B7, S4, and even the B7 RS4. They all had this much better shifting, all aluminum transmission, save some weight. But fortunately, they don't have built-in speed sensors, so you got to deal with that. Ultra Engineering in the UK does have a solution for that, but then the drive shaft and the axles, those all get really complicated, and as far as I know, nobody's done that swap into a D2, so you'd really be in an uncharted territory. So today, we're just going to talk about the O&E. Bottom option. The cheapest O&E you can get is going to be a 5-speed O&E that came in the UR S4 and UR S6, so the 92 to 95 in the US at least, Audi S4 and S6, the C4 chassis. Cheapest one is going to be the early, they call it non-wide first. I don't know if it was all of 95, I think it's mid to late 95 S6s. They physically widened the width of the first gear, and that made it stronger. The early ones, you could strip the teeth off. If you look on 12valve.org, I'll probably write that out here, 12v.org, and you search on the O&E section, it shows you how to identify. There's going to be, to account for that wider gear, there's actually a change in the center case where you can identify if it's a wide first transmission or not. The absolute cheapest one is going to be the early one, the non-wide first. It's probably good enough, especially if you don't launch it. If you, the O&Es, you don't want to shift fast between first and second anyways, just because of the synchro problems, and you know they're not meant to be shifted fast. But the cheapest option is going to be that early one. You can get it for about 250 bucks. If you want a later one with a wide first, probably spending closer to 400 to 500, and I mean, at that point you're kind of infringing on 6-speed O&E territory, but really the 5-speed and the 6-speed have pretty much the same final drive ratios, so you're you're not really gaining anything on the top end, so you're literally just shifting one more time. So a lot of people, say, hey, just use the 5-speed. You don't gain anything going to 6-speed, but some people like 6 gears. I don't know. So the middle option is what I went with, and that's using the B6 3.0 A4 6-speed O&E. In 2003, in the B6 A4, specifically the 3-liter V6, they had a factory O&E. It was a 6-speed. It goes by the FYF or the GBE engine or transmission code. The ratios aren't as desirable if you're doing highway speeds. 3, 4, 5, and 6 are all shorter. They're closer to the RS2 and the B5 RS4. So they make a great, driving car, driving ratios, but not necessarily for highway speeds. Although with the large tire that the D2 has, it's not a problem for me. I don't do that much highway driving. I did the math, and it would take a couple years of the gas savings on the highway to pay for the swapping out a different gear set. B5 S4 O&E, I forget the code on that. Code is, I think it's EDU. That one's got a better 5th and 6th gear, not as good as TDI. So the B6 O&E, super common to find at junkyards. So if you find like a pick and pull apart, you can get those transmissions for $150. If you don't have that option in your local area, they're pretty easy to find on eBay for around $700 shipped. Now, if you want to go to the top, either import a 6-speed from the D2 from Europe, probably, that one's probably, I don't know, $1,500. I'm not sure the ratios on that. But if you really want to, go for the stars, you want to first pick your own whatever ratios you want, then have it rebuilt to have the updated 1-2 synchros. And if you really care about gas mileage and highway cruising, then throw in the TDI 5th and 6th gear. You have a couple different options from that. Advanced Automotion down in Texas, they do a lot of O&E rebuilds. They can source the TDI parts. That's probably going to start around $2,500 and then go up depending on what options you want. So those are your options for transmission. Transmission mounts, bottom tier, DIY. If you've got a welder and an angle grinder, it's pretty easy to cut out just a couple pieces of steel or aluminum if you're really good at TIG welding. So you can probably spend about $50 on making your own trans mounts. Middle tier is probably Beast Car Productions. They make some aftermarket mounts for about $200. Beast Car doesn't have the best reputation, so you might have trouble actually getting those delivered, but I'll list it there as an option. And then the top tier is just the OEM tier, and you get some factory mounts. I think I sourced them for about $250. Next up, clutch and flywheel. So the cheapest option, 40 valve V8s are pretty nice because unlike the 32 valves that had a unique crank number of bolts, 40 valve shares it with all of the V6 stuff. So you can just use B5 S4 or C5 A6 2.7T for, I don't know, 150 bucks. You're going to use 2.7T dual mass flywheel and clutch. Where I went for is the middle tier. That's using the TTV Racing single mass flywheel. I opted for the heavier one for better streetability. And then using the Luck Repset B7 RS4 clutch. I think the flywheel was about $550 imported from the UK. The clutch is around 150 bucks on Rock Auto. And then top tier is going to be either the Euro dual mass flywheel or just buying a new 2.7T dual mass and then factory clutch, all that. You're probably looking at $1,100 on that set. So next we move on to the pedal clusters. So I kind of split this out into clutch pedal and brake pedal. But if you're going to go to the top tier, you just do OEM. You're going to get the pedal cage with both of them already on it. But if you don't go to that top tier, then we're going to split them up. You can start cheapest option, take a D2 A8 automatic brake pedal and chop it up and weld some tabs onto it and turn that into a clutch pedal. At the same time, you have to modify your auto brake pedal. Middle tier is going to be what I did. So that's sourcing a OEM clutch pedal separately with the centering spring and the bushings that go with that. I paid about $150 with it imported from Germany. And then, like I said, top tier is going to be OEM, where you're just going to buy the whole pedal cluster with the clutch and the brake pedal. I think that pedal cluster, it's probably around $350 from Mario, who sells a bunch of stuff on the D2 forums. For brake pedal, cheapest one is modding the auto brake pedal. That's what I did, and then use the B5 pedal cover. If you watch my video, it shows you how to do that. Middle tier, I put that as the same option, modifying the auto pedal, because in that middle tier, you're going to be using OEM clutch pedal, but you're still not going to be buying the full pedal cage. So then you just modify the auto one. And then if you want to go top tier, source that brake pedal separately. I haven't actually sourced that one, but it's probably about the same, so figure $150 for each, or you just buy the full pedal cluster, and that usually comes with the clutch master. Speaking of clutch master, kind of low tier, that's the one I did, and that's modifying a B5 plastic one. It's about $40. Middle tier, same, $40. If you want to go with the OEM, those are getting tough to find. You're looking at probably $150 for a used one, and possibly up to $200 plus for a new OEM clutch master. Then moving on to clutch slave, cheapest option, used B5 plastic one, I don't know, $20, free, go to a junkyard. The better option, I think, is the one I went with, and that's using the C4 master, and that's the all metal one. So that's about $50. So not that much more than a new plastic one. So I didn't even put the new plastic as an option, because if you're buying new, you might as well go for the metal one. And same for the OEM. The C4 is the same as the D2, so $50 there. For clutch hose, you could do a DIY custom line. This is going to change depending on which slave and master setup you use, because the plastic stuff uses push fittings, and the metal stuff uses metric flared lines. So depending on what you choose is kind of going to depend and dictate what way you go with the hose. So custom line, $50. I think I assumed a flared line. Depending, middle tier option is to then upgrade to like a -AN hose with adapters, depending on what slave and master you're using. 034 makes some -AN to those push fittings. Top tier, assuming you're using the OEM stuff, you're using an OEM flared metal line, and I don't know, $100 there. And then for the reverse lights and the neutral safety lockout, DIY harness. If you buy a F125 switch and harvest that, and then fuel injector connector, making up the line, probably $50 there. Middle tier, same. I didn't originally plan on going this route. I planned on going the top tier, which was buying the pre-made harness from Advanced Automotion. I think it's $90, but I lost it. Then later found it after I did the swap, and so I ended up having to make my own harness there. And then for the shifter, the route that I went was modifying a C4 S4 S6 shifter. Even though those transmissions were 5 speeds, it's the exact same shift pattern, so those work as a 6-speed. So you can source those for around $100 to $150. And then top tier is OEM, and you're looking at probably $350 for that. There are other options there. You could try and modify a B5 setup, but none of that's going to bolt into the car. The C4 one bolts into the car. You just have to extend it. There's other ways to possibly do it cheaper if you get a really cheap B5 setup, but I haven't investigated that, so I didn't put it in here as an option. So next up, drivetrain category. So this is the drive shaft and the axles. So the cheapest one for drive shaft is going to be the A8L. So the long wheelbase D2 A8. Just buy a used drive shaft, $100. So it's the right length, but then it puts the carrier bearing in the wrong place. But there's some other people that have done this. I've got a link and some pictures of somebody else that had done this in my project thread, so check that out. And there's a different mount on the bottom of the car that you can actually make that carrier bearing line up with if you mount it where one of the heat shields is. So you just kind of cut out part of the heat shield and then mount the carrier bearing there. So that's going to be your cheapest option, probably $100 at or even less at like a pick and pull. Next option is to then take your S8 drive shaft and have it lengthened. It's really going to depend on the shop that you find. A lot of people don't want to touch them because they're friction welded from the factory. If you find a shop that'll do it, it's probably going to cost you about $500. And the option that I went with, which the OEM one would probably kind of fall into this category, it's probably going to be about the same price, just since you're having to ship a massive item and you're going to want to have it rebuilt. But what I did is, and what I would recommend for this top level, is to buy the Advanced Automotion drive shaft that's new. It's got serviceable U-joints and it's the right length, and I think with shipping it was about $675, or that might not be without shipping, it might be another $50 to $75 for that. And then we get to axles. So this will kind of dictate some of the options you choose for your transmission, or at least you might have to get the axle cups. If you're using a B5 or a C4 or a B6 O&E, pretty much any O&E that comes in North America, you're going to have standard axle cups. I think they're 108 millimeter round cups. So you can use those for the lowest tier if you use the C4 URS6 axles with a CV spacer. So those are all round cups. Everything's going to bolt up. So you use 2 right side front axles, and then you need to extend one of the axles with about a 1-inch spacer. And I talk about it more in my video, where you might be able to use some 996, 997 Porsche factory CV axle spacers for the cheapest option. Middle tier is going to be those same C4 axles, but then with the Beast Car axle spacer. Axles by themselves, say $100 for used ones. Middle tier, let's say you buy some used ones for $100, get them rebuilt, and then get the spacer. You're looking at probably $300. And then if you want factory ones, you're going to need both the factory axles and then also the axle cups that connect to the transmission. The factory D2 O&E stuff, it uses a weird pattern. I forget if it's triangles or if it's just a larger physical bolt circle diameter. But those axles are kind of unique, and you got to match the cups to them. So for that option, you're probably looking at about $400. So next here, just the ECU. So this is the flash that you need to get the manual tune on there. Cheapest option is going to be just reflashing the auto ECU with the manual Euro file. Lots of people have this option out there. Actually, the cheapest one is going to be to do it yourself if you're familiar with that. I believe the file is out there on Nefmoto, Nefarious Motorsports. It's kind of a DIY forum for tuning the Bosch ME7 stuff. So you could do that for pretty much free, whatever it costs for a programming cable. If you're familiar, I'm not, so I didn't put that in there. Having somebody do this, I had mine done at EFI Express, but there's lots of tuners out there that can do this. You're starting at about $200 for just a base file, no modifications. I think mine was around $600, but I also did quite a few mods where I deleted secondary air injection, deleted the secondary O2 sensors, raised the rev limiter to 7,500 RPM due to my valve springs. So I was a bit more beyond just the standard flash, so mine was more expensive, but I've gotten quotes for about $200. Top tier is going to be finding a OEM 6-speed ECU. I just put a ballpark in there of about $500. I'm not sure I've seen one, so that would be hard to find. And last thing is just kind of miscellaneous things that you're going to do while you're in there. So this is kind of intangibles. So my list that I show here in the spreadsheet doesn't have everything. It's not a complete list. I've got a more complete list in my project thread, but even then you're going to run into things that you just don't think of, or as you're taking it apart you might find things that are broken that you might want to fix. So absolutely cheapest, $0. You do none of that. Nothing. You just buy these parts and that should pretty much get you there. So middle tier is probably about what I did and it's just a few things here and there. So not fixing everything, but it's like, oh, you see leaky gaskets, you replace those. If you want to delete your secondary air, you block off plates, stuff like that. So, you know, you're going to spend $500 there. And then top tier, you're in there, you're fixing everything that's wrong, and you're going to spend $1,000. Like I said, you can pick and choose, but if you chose all of the cheap things, you're looking at, you know, just under $1,200 to do this swap. You know, that makes a lot of sense, because if you have a broken automatic transmission, you can gamble with a used one for, I don't know, $500 to $1,000 plus all of the time to swap that in there. I removed it from the bottom, and I would not want to put one back in from the bottom. So if you want the auto, keep the auto, but you're going to do so much work to pull it out and put it back in that you might as well spend the extra money and have that transmission rebuilt, because you don't want to do that again. That whole labor to do it again is going to pretty much negate you from having that trans rebuilt the first time. So do it once, do it right. It's kind of my motto. And you know, a rebuild on these, you're looking at $2,500 to $3,500 minimum, depending on how bad your parts are. Middle tier, this is, you know, I kind of mixed and matched. I did some cheaper things because I can fabricate. I did some nicer things because I didn't want to deal with some things. Even though I picked and choose, I still kind of ended up in the middle, and I probably spent about $3,500. Now, this still kind of makes sense. Like I said, if you're doing a rebuild, you're looking at, you know, close to $3,000 plus all the labor. So $3,500 in parts. My transmission was rebuilt already. You know, I only had, you know, 10, 20,000 miles on the rebuild. So I was able to sell it and recuperate about half of that. Not as much as I would have liked, but, you know, that's one option. If your trans is still good, you know, you can still probably sell it for, you know, $800 or something. Even a core, you can, you know, if it's dead, you can still sell it as a core to a rebuilder for a couple $100, which, hey, that helps. So this swap still makes sense. You know, even at $3,500, you know, that's what a rebuild's going to cost. It's more enjoyable to drive, and it certainly helps just working on these things. A lot smaller transmission to work around. And then top tier, if you want to spend all the money in the world fixing everything, going OEM, rebuilt, super awesome, you can spend up to $7,500, which in most cases is worth more than most D2 S8s. At least, you know, still with the auto transmission. With a manual, can be an investment. Those cars generally sell for more than nice autos because they're generally more desirable. There you go. That's how much it costs to swap a D2 S8. Like I said, the spreadsheet is linked down below, and it's just kind of an overview. Check out my project thread for all the parts and part numbers and more details. Check out my video series of how to do this once you collect all these parts. And like I said, you can mix and match. You don't have to go the cheapest option. You don't have to do the middle. You don't have to buy all the OEM parts. Just kind of choose what you feel comfortable with and what your budget allows. That's the nice thing about this spreadsheet is, say you have a budget of $2,500, you can pick and choose what you do here if you have some fab skills to make that worthwhile and allow yourself to hit that budget. But it's kind of a balance. So, you know, what you're going to spend less physical money on, you're probably going to spend more time doing. Balance how much effort you want to put into this and how much cash you want to put into it. Thanks for watching this video. I hope it helps out. I'd love to see more manual swap S8s out there. If you haven't already, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.